I'm back with John O'Donnell, President and Chief Executive Officer for Allstate Insurance. John, just before the break, we just started to touch into the vision and mission issue and opportunities that surround that, and I was very rude and interrupted you, so I apologize for that. But let's come back to that, if you don't mind. I understand that when you came into the Canadian organization, that was one of the things that you looked at, and with the eye to maybe refreshing it or making it more current, as opposed to it was wrong and now we're going to correct it. Share with us a little bit about that.
Sure. So the idea was to make sure that all of our employees could connect with it. I think, and I was mentioning in the military, I had a deep connection to our mission.
And part of that reason is because it's real clear. I mean, there's no ambiguity about it, and you really were able to connect with it and say, I see how I'm there.
Correct. Disney would be another good example of an organization that I think had it right. I worked in Walt Disney World for a period of time, not in the park itself, but we would, employees would go out a couple times a year to help out. You'd be in your business casual, but you'd have your name, everyone wore your name tag. But one of the things that I took away from there was the deep connection that all the employees had to their mission in the parks, which was to provide an exceptional entertainment experience, make people happy, provide a good experience. And I like to tell, and I've used this at Allstate, very simple example, but I call it the ice cream cone story.
Yes.
Where, and you may have even heard this already.
It's one of their more famous stories, but it's a great one. Yeah.
So there's someone, maybe a custodial worker in the park, and sees a little girl drop her ice cream cone, and his job and the overall mission is to sweep up, make sure it looks really nice and it's clean, and that's one of the differentiators I think when you go to a Disney park. But he also knows the overall mission and the experience that they're trying to create down there. When I mentioned empowerment in the organization, that employee is empowered to fulfill the overall mission and change the experience for that particular customer. So without any authorities required or bureaucracy, can go over, get another ice cream cone from the nearest vendor, bring it over, and create a positive customer experience. And that's what we're trying to fulfill in our organization too. So when we talk about being deeply connected to the mission of Allstate, an example would be in claims. We're trying to help our employees, and they want this as well, to become more empowered and to remove some of the organizational barriers that they may have to be able to do this. So if it's to provide strength, experience, and care, as you mentioned, when a customer really needs us the most, we've actually been training our employees in some critical thinking skills and looking at the end goal of having a positive customer experience and a fair resolution of the claim. So one example would be there's an accident, and within the accident it's a relatively simple claim, but the car seat is damaged. The process may call for getting some sort of proof of ownership of the car seat, and waiting for that to transpire. But at the same point, we facilitate a rental car, and they need the car seat.
Yeah.
So that would be an experience in which we're allowing or encouraging even the employee to use some critical thinking, a step maybe outside the process a little, and provide what the customer needs at that given time, and create an environment where the employee feels empowered to do so. So that's a big part of what we're trying to accomplish.
Well, and sometimes I think the term critical thinking is just the fancy business way of saying common sense, because truly when you think about it, that just makes sense. And I like to use the term purpose versus task. And to go back to your analogy at Disney, The gentleman's task in that story was to sweep. That was his task, and that was probably on his job description. You will do these things. But they made the point of saying, but here, we're here for a bigger purpose. We're here for, you know, to provide smiles and all that kind of stuff. And I find that too often organizations get so focused on the tasks at hand, and that's where you get the process and you get the binders full of, you know, here's your job description, and they forget that they're connecting with a customer. So what you're doing in empowering your teams to be able to respond to those customer needs is really getting them focused on the vision, getting focused on the mission, and understanding their task or their purpose as opposed to the task at hand.
Correct. In the military, we used to call that commander's intent. So everyone would have their certain task, as you say, but would understand the overall purpose. So
right.
when things often would not go exactly per plan, you could adjust and still fulfill the overall intent of the mission.
But the interesting thing is the only way you can adjust is if you truly do understand the overall intent, because if you're so task focused, then if you go off rails, it's like, okay, now what do I do? Because I don't have clarity on my task, and that allows that critical thinking or common sense to kind of
Yep.
jump into the case.
Yeah, so it's the I would say it's a couple things. It's the understanding of the overall intent. It's also feeling that you have I've said it, empowerment, but it's a safe environment for you to do so, which sometimes, you know, that there will be mistakes made, and there will be judgments that could potentially be questioned. But if someone is trying to fulfill the overall mission, I think you have to accept that and create the environment where you're giving people leeway to make those decisions.
Yeah. Well, and that's a really important point you brought up, John, is the concept of that safety to make the decision because you believe it's right, mm-hmm. without fearing mm-hmm. that there's going to be a punitive kind of aspect to, well, what if I made the wrong decision?
Correct.
And I think what I heard, and, you know, jump in and correct me if I've missed it, but, you know, what you've done was done with the right intent, and now I have the opportunity to potentially coach you if a similar situation arises in the future on maybe an alternative way to handle it, but you're not going to be punished for what you've done this time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so, and I think that sometimes, you know, creating that culture is hard, and it comes down to that trust that we talked about earlier. I'm going to trust that you're an adult. I mean, I always like to say to some of my clients that, you know, we decided to hire the smart people. The competition hired all the idiots. But the truth of the matter is, all too often, you know, as leaders, if we're not careful, we treat people like idiots. You know, oh, you can't make a smart decision. So, you know, I think it's great that obviously I think it's great that you guys are doing that, and I suspect you're seeing some positive results from that. Tell us a little bit about, you know, we talked a little bit about, you know, the kind of questions, you know, the feedback you're using to get from customers. What's their response to these kind of activities that your teams are now able to implement?
Well, we're seeing some positive results on the claims side. In the numbers, we've actually seen satisfaction go up. Some of these, it's hard to attribute to specific yeah. critical thinking training or
but there's a trend that's showing up.
Absolutely. So we are seeing a trend, and, you know, I think it does get back, and it's funny how it happens, because you focus, you start with the core mission, and then you see that start to play out in the behaviors of employees. You start to see it play out on maybe the softer side of how, you know, those behaviors and how we interact with our customer, and eventually it starts to show up in the numbers and then show up in the results.
So, you know, there would be a lot of people that would suggest that maybe the insurance industry as a whole is a somewhat mercenary business. But the truth of the matter is, what I'm hearing here and what I've experienced myself is that, you know, by focusing your business around the customer's needs, one, you're driving customer satisfaction and loyalty up, and guess what? Profitability is taking some positive hits as well.
Absolutely. You know, another thing, so we'll see that customers stay with us longer, and you mentioned that. There's definitely that direct correlation. The other thing that we've noticed from that is we get a lot of referrals from customers who have good experiences with
right.
us. So particularly with our model where we have local agencies, we're heavily involved in the community. That's something that we rely on to drive growth in our business. So it really all does tie together.
Well, the interesting thing about the insurance business, as we talked earlier, is that, you know, a lot of what you offer is a promise. You know, so, you know, ideally, you know, all I ever want to buy from you is a promise. I don't ever want to buy the actual insurance because that means I've had a bad thing happen.
Right.
But when something bad happens and, you know, I call my insurance person and they look after me, I would be bold enough to suggest that that is probably the greatest opportunity to generate incremental business than at any other time in the life cycle of a customer, because if I've just had a great experience, I'm going to be more inclined to be loyal because you've helped me out of a difficult time, and I'm probably going to be more inclined to tell my friends and family, this is where you want to go, because when I needed them, I was there.
And we actually we can measure that too. Insurance is very data rich.
Yeah, I'm sure it is, yeah.
And you know, obviously it makes common sense that.
And there's no nastiness about that. I mean, let's be clear. I mean, you've helped someone out, and for you to look at that as a great opportunity to increase your business, there's nothing wrong with that. But so carry on.
But so we see that customers who score best in satisfaction and in the top tier in satisfaction after a claim are definitely much more likely to retain with us, and we can track that back. And certainly, you know, I would anticipate that they'd be more likely to refer as well.
Yeah, and that's really how you'd grow your business.
Absolutely.
Right. So we're going to take another little break here. This will be our last break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about, maybe we'll talk about how you reward and recognize people for doing great work with the customer.
Great.